Some moments don't knock, they walk in uninvited. Arnold Schwarzenegger hadn't planned to speak that day. He wasn't on the guest list. He wasn't welcome. But when he stepped into that crowded convention hall in Dallas, all it took was 60 seconds. 60 seconds to challenge the noise. To remind a divided room that discipline speaks louder than volume. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button. The ballroom buzzed like every other Trump event. Packed chairs, flags waving, reporters jostling for the best shot. Everything felt rehearsed, like clockwork, until it didn't. The lights dimmed, music blasted, and Trump made his signature entrance. Slow steps, wide grin, finger guns to the crowd. A familiar script. Applause erupted, signs lifted, phones flashed. But just as he reached the podium, a shift. Not in volume, but in attention. Heads turned, first in the back row, then like a ripple down the center aisle. A tall figure had stepped into the room, not through the main entrance, not escorted, just there. Dressed in a dark blazer, wide shoulders cutting through the crowd. His pace was calm, deliberate, not trying to hide, but not demanding notice either, until the name clicked. Someone whispered it first, then another, then another. Is that Wait? Is that Arnold? And it was. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator, the Governator, the man who once ran California and never held back on criticizing Trump. And now, here he was, walking solo into a rally that no one thought he'd ever show up at, especially not today, especially not like this. Trump caught sight of him by the third row. His speech halted mid-sentence. The room didn't notice at first, still caught between disbelief and confusion, but Trump's eyes locked in, jaw tightened. He turned away from the mic slightly and muttered something off mic, then leaned back in. Is this a joke? His voice echoed louder. Can someone tell me why he's here? The crowd murmured, phones tilted. Some began to boo, others just watched. Security, Trump barked. Get him out. Two men near the back shifted immediately, pressing through the crowd toward Arnold's direction. The camera crews turned, unsure whether to zoom in or cut feed. The whole room tilted, like gravity shifted sideways. Arnold didn't flinch, he didn't wave, he didn't smile, just kept walking calmly along the side aisle, eyes forward, jaw set, like he wasn't walking into a fight, but through one. Trump tried to laugh it off. What's next? Rambo showing up. A few chuckles, weak, the timing was off. The room was unsure. Trump turned to his aides off stage. He's not on the list. Is he on the list? I want him gone. But Arnold kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just forward. One woman in the third row looked up at him and lowered her phone. She didn't smile, she just stared. He passed her. A man in a red tie shouted from the sixth row, "You don't belong here." Trump pointed toward Arnold and repeated it. "You don't belong here." But the tone didn't land the same. It wasn't dominance, it was nerves. Trump didn't like surprises, and this man was one. Just as the security team approached from the side, Arnold stopped walking, hands at his sides. No show, no gesture, just presence. And then he said 6 words that sliced through the room like a wire pulled tight. "I'm not here to fight you." Trump squinted. "Then what are you doing here?" Arnold's voice didn't rise, it didn't waver. "Give me 60 seconds. Then I'll leave." The security paused. That wasn't in the playbook. Neither was the pause that followed, long enough for the crowd to hold breath, short enough for someone to break it. A woman's voice rose from the left. "He was governor," that's all she said. No shouting, no cheering, just a reminder. Then another voice, this time a man. "I voted for both of you, let him talk." Not a wave, but enough. The guards hesitated. Trump scanned the room. It wasn't the reaction he expected. Arnold hadn't yelled, he hadn't grandstood, but somehow the air felt heavier now, more uncertain, and uncertainty was dangerous. "This isn't a town hall," Trump snapped. "This is a rally." Then turned to the crowd with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "All right, fine, 60 seconds. Let's hear what the Governator has to say." He gestured with exaggerated flair. "Say something brilliant." He laughed. But no one really joined in. Arnold didn't move toward the stage. He didn't even look at it. He stood just beneath it, slightly off-center, turned to the crowd, not Trump. No mic, no fanfare. Just a man standing still in a room that wasn't sure what to do next. He didn't move, Not when Trump waved him off. Not when the security guards inched closer. Arnold stood steady, arms relaxed, face unreadable. No anger. No smugness, just the stillness of someone who'd walked into louder rooms and left them quieter. 60 seconds, he repeated. Then I leave. The crowd stirred. A few laughed, uncertain. Some craned their necks, as if trying to catch a better look at him. But others, older faces, veterans in their posture, folded arms in the front row, watched differently, measured. The guards hesitated, glancing at each other. One reached for his earpiece, waiting for the next order. "Why should we give you anything?" Trump snapped, his voice cracking slightly under the weight of the moment. "You come in here like you own the place." He looked to the audience, fishing for approval. "That's Hollywood for you." A few laughs, scattered but weak. Then a woman stood, late 60s, grey coat, buttoned to the top. "He gave California 8 years," she said calmly. He didn't scream, he didn't insult, he served. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Trump heard it. Everyone did. A man in the third row, thick mustache, camo jacket, raised his voice next. "I didn't agree with him back then. But I didn't serve under cowards. Let him talk." The shift wasn't dramatic. It was slow, uneven, but it was real. Phones started lowering. A few reporters leaned forward, unsure whether to film or freeze. Trump exhaled through his nose, annoyed. "You want a podcast? Start one," he said into the mic. "This is my time." But it didn't sound like control anymore. It sounded like friction. Arnold still hadn't moved. He wasn't asking for the stage. He wasn't even asking for agreement. Just a sliver of space in a room that didn't want to give it. "I'm not here to argue," he said at last. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I'm not here to win anyone over. I'm not your enemy. I'm not your savior." He looked out over the crowd. "But I am someone who has served, who has bled for this country in my own way, and I've earned 60 seconds. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind that waits to be broken, but the kind that settles." Trump looked to his right, at one of the aides pacing just off stage. A brief shake of the head. There was no clean way to stop this now. No version that didn't cost something. "Fine," Trump said flatly. 60 seconds, let's see what you've got." He stepped back from the mic and gestured widely. "Clock starts now." The guards stood down. No one moved to escort Arnold. And no one looked away. Arnold didn't rush. He didn't climb the stairs. He stayed exactly where he was, beneath the stage, on the ground level with the people. His hands clasped lightly in front of him, his frame still as stone. But his presence undeniable. For a moment, it felt like the whole room was holding its breath, not sure whether to brace or believe. A kid in the back stopped recording and just listened. A man near the side entrance took off his cap. A woman 3 rows in wiped under her eye, not sure why. And still, Arnold didn't speak. Not yet. The pause wasn't for effect. It wasn't theater. It was conviction. The conviction of someone who knew that what came next had to be more than noise. It had to be earned. He scanned the crowd slowly, then nodded once, just slightly, the kind of gesture people remember without knowing why. He was ready. "I was born in a small village in Austria," he began. His accent didn't hide that. It never had, heavy, unmistakable, but every word landed clean. No hot water, no refrigerator, one bed for the whole family. The walls were cold in winter. Sometimes the soup was too. He paused, letting that settle. "We didn't dream big in that village. We dreamed warm. We dreamed full stomachs." The crowd had stopped shifting. No one moved. "My father was a police chief, hard man, old world. He taught with his fists more than his words. He told me I was nothing special. He told me I was too soft to survive." Arnold's voice didn't tremble. He wasn't revisiting pain. He was laying stone. "But I had a dream. I saw a picture of a man called Reg Park, Mr. Universe, and I decided that I would leave that village. I would become something." A few people nodded unconsciously. One man whispered, "I know Reg Park." Arnold went on. "I started training when I was 15. Not because I loved lifting weights, but because it was the only thing that made me feel strong, not just on the outside, inside too." He lifted his eyes, scanning the crowd again. "I came to America with $20 in my pocket. No English, no connections, just a body and a dictionary." Trump stood off to the side now, arms folded. He wasn't laughing, wasn't heckling, just watching. My first job was laying bricks, then cleaning gyms, then working as a bouncer, all while I carried that little dictionary in my back pocket. Every break, I'd pull it out and learn 5 words a day, 7 days a week. The silence grew heavier, not forced, not dramatic, just real. I wasn't supposed to be anything in this country. I was the immigrant with the accent too thick for television, the body too big for casting directors. They told me I'd never make it, that my name was too long, that I should go back. He paused again, just long enough. And yet I became Mr. Olympia 7 times. I became a citizen. I became an actor. I became governor of the largest state in the country, not because I was loud, not because I was perfect, but because I worked every day, every hour. I didn't yell, I didn't blame, I just kept showing up. In the back, someone lowered their phone, not because the clip wasn't worth recording, but because the moment was worth living. Now I'm not here to lecture anyone. I'm not here to rewrite your opinions. I'm here because I've been watching for a long time, and it scares me, not the shouting, not the policies, but the fact that we stop listening the second we hear a name we don't like. A woman near the stage nodded slightly, almost involuntarily. We call each other enemies when all we've done is disagree. We cheer louder when someone is mocked than when someone is understood. He leaned forward a little, not closer to power, but closer to the people. This country gave me everything, a second chance, a dream bigger than that cold little kitchen I came from, and I will not stand by while we turn it into a shouting match where only the loudest win. A murmur moved through the room, not loud, not chaotic, but alive. I've made mistakes, he said plainly. I've failed, I've been humbled by scandal and loss. I've lost family, I've broken trust, but I've tried to rebuild, not by hiding but by staying and listening and showing up again. There was no apology in his voice, just honesty, just wait. You don't have to agree with me. I didn't come here for applause. I didn't even come here expecting respect. I came because I still believe in this country. And if someone like me, who was told no 1,000 times, can still believe maybe you can too, a long beat. Then he stepped back half a foot, hands still folded, shoulders still square. That's all. He turned, but the room didn't move. Not right away, not yet. The air felt changed, not exploded, but shifted, like something was nudged just a few inches to the side, and now nothing fit the same way. Even Trump stayed where he was, quiet, watching. The seconds stretched. But no one filled them with noise, not yet. The first sound was barely audible, a single clap, slow, coming from the back right corner. One person, then another. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't a wave, but it was real, and it was enough. Someone stood, red baseball cap, folded arms now loosened, clapping with measured rhythm. A few people turned toward him, confused. Then slowly a second person rose. Then a third, not in unison, not for show, just rising. Not all clapped, not all approved, but no one interrupted. Trump watched from the side of the stage, eyes narrowed, arms still folded. He shifted his weight slightly but didn't move forward, not yet. A man in the middle row called out, "Governor Schwarzenegger." He didn't yell, he didn't posture, he just said it clearly. "I didn't vote for you, I never even liked you, but what you said just now, that was the most honest thing I've heard in a long time. Thank you." Arnold didn't smile, he didn't nod. He simply stood where he was, hands relaxed, grounded. Another voice chimed in, this time from the second row. A younger man, beard and flannel shirt. "I came here to hear Trump talk, but somehow I think I needed to hear this more." Trump's jaw shifted. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces, loyal ones. He spotted a longtime volunteer, a woman who'd worked 3 states for his campaign. She was standing now too, not clapping, just standing, and looking at Arnold. That was the moment. Trump felt it, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The room hadn't turned on him, but it wasn't fully with him either. The equilibrium had cracked. He stepped forward again, trying to reclaim the tempo. "All right, folks," he said, voice tight but controlled. "We've had our civics lesson. Let's get back to fixing the country, huh?" He forced a smile, a few laughs, a few claps, but the rhythm wasn't right, not like before, and he could feel it. Then, as Trump adjusted the mic, someone called out calm but loud enough. "Why don't you respond to what he said?" That froze everything. The crowd inhaled as one, phones shot back into the air. Trump blinked twice. "I don't need to respond," he said finally, voice clipped. He gave his opinion, "I've got mine, and I was the one invited." From below the stage, Arnold stepped back into view, not to speak, but to acknowledge. He gave a small nod to the crowd, then turned as if to leave. But halfway down the aisle he stopped, turned, faced the room one last time. "I didn't come here for attention," he said. "But maybe some of you came here needing to hear something different. Not better, not perfect, just different." With that he walked off. No security, no exit music. Just quiet footsteps and a crowd that wasn't sure what to do next. Backstage, the silence wasn't respectful. It was heavy, the kind that comes after something lands harder than expected. Trump paced, eyes darting, lips moving without sound. The backstage monitor still showed a frozen frame of Arnold mid-turn, walking away, jaw set, eyes calm. Trump pointed at it, frustrated. He hijacked it. That's what just happened. He hijacked the whole damn thing. A young aide tried to speak, stopped, then tried again. "Technically, he was allowed in, sir. Representative Hargrove invited him, couldn't make it, so the guest pass." "I don't care about technically," Trump snapped. "You know who else gets in technically? Hackers, criminals." He grabbed a water bottle from the side table, opened it, didn't drink. "How do you let that guy, of all people, walk in and talk like that?" No one answered, not yet. Then from the corner of the room, a slower voice. Wesley Stokes, senior advisor, trusted, rarely rushed. He didn't walk in to talk, he walked in to be seen, and he was. Trump turned, eyes sharp. He came in with a plan, you saw him. No nerves, no hesitation, that wasn't off the cuff. Wesley nodded slowly, "Maybe not, but that's what made it work." Trump leaned forward. He stood there like he owned the place, and some of our people clapped. "You saw that, right?" "They reacted," Wesley said. "They weren't voting, they were feeling something they didn't expect to feel, and it shook them a little." Trump didn't like that word, shook. He preferred dominated, outplayed, but shook felt too real, too involuntary. "He's not the future," Trump muttered. "He's a distraction, noise." "Maybe," Wesley replied, "but noise travels fast, and that clip's already circulating." He opened a tablet, footage, low res, but sharp enough to show the contrast. The calmness, the power shift. "Some people are calling it a turning point." Trump scoffed. "Over 60 seconds, come on, 60 seconds that cut through everything else," Wesley said, because he didn't raise his voice, he didn't insult. He didn't even take the stage, he just stood, that's all. Trump watched the screen again, still frame. Arnold looking directly at someone off camera, hands clasped, solid, grounded. "People don't want quiet," Trump said finally. "They want someone who fights for them." Wesley didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Maybe, or maybe they're just tired of the noise being the only thing that wins. Trump sat, not slumped, just thoughtful, hands on his knees. For a moment he didn't speak, then quietly, almost to himself. He had the room, I'll give him that. Wesley blinked. "You respect what he did?" Trump looked away. "I respect strategy," he said. "Doesn't mean I won't tear it down." Outside, the crowd was still buzzing, not with chants or cheers, with questions, with replays, with small conversations that felt bigger than usual. Some supporters were annoyed, others curious, a few unsettled, but no one had moved on. Not yet. Campaign staff rushed to get ahead of it. A statement, a clip reframing the moment, talking points for TV. One intern typed 3 different drafts of a response tweet. None of them stuck. And in the quiet corners of the internet, the video spread. It wasn't flashy, no background music, just a man with an accent and a pause that made people lean in. And for Trump, that pause, more than any words, was the problem. It wasn't just that Arnold had spoken, it was that people had listened. Hours later, the noise hadn't stopped. Messages stacked on Arnold's phone like bricks in a wall, missed calls, mentions, notifications without end. News channels ran split screens. On one side, Trump raising his voice. On the other, Arnold saying almost nothing and somehow saying more, but Arnold wasn't watching. He sat alone in his apartment in Los Angeles, lights low, blinds pulled just enough to dull the street outside. He didn't turn on the TV, he just let the silence hang until Rubin knocked, his press manager. Steady, loyal. Laptop in one hand, phone in the other. "It's blowing up," he said, dropping onto the opposite chair. "Clips everywhere. PBS wants a sit-down, so does CNN. Even someone from Fox reached out." Arnold didn't answer right away. Just kept looking out the window. "I didn't do it for airtime," he said finally. "I didn't walk in there to make headlines." Rubin nodded, though he'd heard this before. "I know, but it happened anyway." He opened the laptop. Tabs open, social feeds, headlines, some praising, some cynical, some already twisting. They're calling it the 60-second stand. Arnold turned slightly. "That's the problem. We talk about the time, not the reason." Rubin scrolled. "You didn't expect applause. I didn't even expect attention," Arnold said. "I just couldn't sit through another speech about what real Americans want, like I'm not one of them." He leaned forward. "My accent doesn't make me less American. My past doesn't erase my present. I've bled for this place, not on a battlefield, but through 100 humiliations, and I'm still standing." Rubin pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came from the event staff. Some guy left it for you on his way out, said he didn't have social media." Arnold unfolded it. 5 words, "I don't agree, but I listened." No name, no email, just that. He held it a moment longer than expected, then set it on the table. "That," he said, "that's more than most people are willing to do." Rubin sat back. "You could ride this, you know, take the interviews, go national again. You've got people's attention." Arnold shook his head. "I don't want attention, I want a reset." He paused. "You know what I regret most?" Rubin didn't answer, just waited. "I regret that speaking calmly is now considered radical. That not yelling makes people stare like it's some new invention." The apartment stayed quiet, only the hum of the refrigerator in the distance. "There was a time," Arnold said, "when people respected effort more than noise. When character mattered more than clicks. I miss that." He looked over at Rubin. "You know why I really went to that event?" Rubin leaned in. "Because I remember being a boy in Austria, watching my father yell at my mother. I said nothing. I just stood there, frozen. That moment stuck to me like frost. Years later, people shouted me down in auditions, told me I didn't belong, too foreign, too thick, too strange. I stayed silent then too." He exhaled. "I've spent half my life breaking silence with action, but sometimes words matter, even just a few." Rubin nodded. "And now," Arnold leaned back, "now I want people to know I'm still here, not as a symbol, not as a legend. Just as a man who didn't yell, but still got heard." Outside, someone walked past the window. Music from a passing car faded into the distance. Arnold looked down at the folded paper again, just 5 words. But they echoed louder than applause. The moment didn't end in the ballroom. It lingered, quietly, like dust that doesn't settle, just floats. By the next morning, grainy clips had been reshared more than 200,000 times. No music. No filters. Just a man with a thick accent, standing below a stage, speaking like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Across the country, it showed up in places no one expected. A truck stop diner in Arkansas, a teacher's lounge in Ohio, a coffee shop in Oakland where Arnold sat tucked in the back corner, hoodie up, head down, hoping for silence. It didn't last. The barista recognized him first. Then the woman in scrubs near the window. She hesitated, then walked over slowly. "Excuse me," she said, almost whispering. "Are you him?" Arnold looked up. "I am," he said, voice low. "I watched the video 3 times, she said. "My dad's a retired steelworker, never listens to anyone outside his side. But when he saw that, he didn't say anything, just got real quiet." She pulled a small piece of folded paper from her pocket and placed it on the table. "He doesn't do social media, but he wanted me to give you this." Then she turned and left. Arnold opened it. Handwritten, slanted letters, just 1 sentence. "I still don't agree with you, but I didn't look away." He stared at the paper for a long time. Later that day, he sat for a local interview. Nothing national, no production lights. Just Shelby Dunn, a political reporter who had been covering Texas politics longer than most candidates had been alive. "I've seen a lot of speeches," she said, but I've never seen a room stop breathing the way it did for you. Arnold offered a faint smile. I didn't plan for that. I wasn't trying to steal anything. Shelby leaned in. Then why walk in at all? He paused. Because I've spent a lifetime building things with my hands, my body, my silence, but sometimes silence becomes its own kind of noise, and I didn't want to be part of that. You were aware of the risk, she said. Of course, he replied, but fear wasn't the problem. Regret was. I was more afraid of what it would mean if I stayed home and said nothing. She nodded slowly. Do you think it would have landed the same if you'd raised your voice? Arnold shook his head. That room wasn't built to hear my anger. If I'd come in shouting, they would have tuned me out before I said my name. He paused, but I didn't shout. And because of that, they had to make a choice. Listen or leave, and most of them stayed. Back at the convention center, the ripple hadn't stopped. It showed up inside conversations, hallway whispers, panel delays. One moment in particular stood out. Near the coffee station, 3 men from 3 different counties, different beliefs, different buttons on their lapels, no yelling, no phones, just a quiet conversation about what they'd heard, not agreement. Just listening. At the next panel, a state senator cleared his throat mid-sentence. I wasn't going to mention it, he said, but I'd be lying if I acted like it didn't happen. He looked around the room. Arnold Schwarzenegger stood here. He didn't shout, he didn't insult, he just stood his ground. You don't have to like him, I'm not sure I do, but courage still means something in politics. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was honest. Arnold didn't hear it, he wasn't there. He was walking the streets of his district again, shaking hands, talking to teachers, listening to business owners, refusing interviews from the networks now fighting for airtime. His staff begged him to ride the wave, but he chose the sidewalk instead. I don't want them to turn me into a headline, he said. I'm still a neighbor. That was the real message, not the speech, not the moment, but what came after. Because once people see there's another way to be heard, they start expecting more from others and from themselves. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.